It is finally here. It is finally that time of year. The journey we started in October is finally reaching its conclusion after 82 games. After 3 rounds of this NBA postseason, we are finally at the pinnacle. We are finally down to our last two teams. We are finally at the NBA Finals. What is up, everyone? And welcome back to another edition, a special edition of Inside the Lines. I'm your host, Isaac, and we are getting into this intriguing NBA Finals matchup between the Dallas Mavericks and the Boston Celtics. I don't know if you can tell, but I am extremely excited to be here with you all. Extremely excited to delve into this finals matchup between Boston and Dallas. And without further ado, come on, let's get into it. Let's get it started. We're going to start it off with kind of reviewing how these teams got here, starting off with the Boston Celtics, the best team in basketball this entire season, finishing with a league best 64 wins and 18 losses, number one overall seed the entire season, and kept that level of consistency, kept that level of high play continuing into the postseason. They kept it consistent going into the postseason, starting with their quick 5-game series against the Miami Heat, and followed it up with another quick 5-game series against the Cleveland Cavaliers, and finally to where they are now, making even quicker work of the Indiana Pacers by sweeping them and securing their spot in the 2024 NBA Finals. Before we move on to Dallas, I kind of wanted to take a closer look at Boston's journey to the NBA Finals as it pertains specifically to the Eastern Conference Finals matchup that they just emerged victorious from against Indiana. And, taking a closer look at that series in particular, I wanted to kind of delve into how Boston was able to emerge victorious in this series and why they were successful and what maybe they could take going into the NBA Finals. So, looking at this series coming into the conference finals, I felt as though Boston definitely had the advantage on the defensive end. Remember, coming into the series, they ranked second amongst teams remaining in defensive rating this entire postseason. I thought they had the advantage defensively. I thought they had the advantage with role players, guys like Drew Holiday and Derek White. I did think Indiana had a bench advantage, though, definitely for sure coming into the series. But I also thought that Boston had the playoff experience edge, right? I did think Indiana had the coaching advantage, and I also thought they had the advantage on the three-point shooting side as well and controlling the paint. Taking a look at how that series ended up playing out, I definitely feel as though, when we take a look at it and when we evaluate it, those factors that I highlighted, some of them definitely came into play, but I think specifically what gave Boston the edge, what allowed them to win this series was, number one, their late game execution. Look, there were so many instances in this playoff series where Indiana had the lead within the final 5 minutes in clutch time, right? And they still ended up losing all 4 games. This was something that, and like I said, 3 out of the 4 games happened. And I think when it comes down to it, late game execution, Boston really, really took it to Indiana. Another thing that they did was limit turnovers. Why was the late game execution so poor from Indiana? Well, I think it's because of the fact that they kept turning the ball over. Indiana, coming into this series, coming into the postseason altogether, they were not known as a heavy turnover team or turnover heavy team, but get this, in the playoffs, in this series, they averaged 15.8 turnovers through 4 games in this series. 15.8 would have finished worse than league worst Utah's turnovers per game, which was 15.7, to kind of put that in perspective. And Boston themselves are not known for being a team that forces the opponent to turn the ball over all that much. In fact, they were tied for 29th in the NBA, tied for almost last place in that category of forcing turnovers in the NBA this season. So Indiana being turnover prone in this series is something that wasn't entirely expected, and something that I think lends itself to playoff experience, right? I think the playoff experience was definitely something that Boston exploited in this matchup, as well as the coaching matchup. I was thoroughly shocked to see how outcoached Rick Carlisle was outcoached in this series. So when I take a look at it from that perspective, the late game execution, the turnovers by Indiana, and how Boston was able to limit theirs and Indiana was not, the bench and the role players stepping up for Boston, taking a step back and looking at it from the perspective of Drew Holiday and who we're going to get to, and Derek White, guys who played very, very well in their roles, either off the bench or even, playing off those stars. I think that is why Boston was able to come into this series and sweep the Indiana Pacers 4-0. Taking a look at guys who really had an impact in this series, you got to start with the best player in the series, who I said was the best player in the series, coming in, Jason Tatum. Jason Tatum had himself a very, very solid showing in this series. Give him his credit. He averaged 30 points per game, 30.3 points per game, 46% from the field, 10 boards, 6.3 assists. Still not the greatest showing from the three-point line to this point in the postseason. He's continued to struggle with that. He's actually shooting sub 30% from three the entire postseason, but still a very good showing throughout this series. In Game 3, Tatum had 36 points, 10 boards, and 8 assists off 12 of 23 from the field and 5 of 10 from 3. That is something I want to continue to watch going forward. Tatum has struggled, like I said, from 3 to this point in the postseason, but he shot a little bit better those last couple of games from 3. So I wonder if that's something that's going to carry over into the NBA Finals going forward. So like I said, Tatum, he played very, very well, and give him his due. But let's focus it in on the Eastern Conference Finals. Larry Bird MVP winner Jaylen Brown. Jaylen Brown throughout these conference finals averaged 29.8 points per game with 5 boards off 51.7% shooting from the field and 37% shooting from 3. He tied his playoff career high in Game 2 with 40 points off 14 of 27 from the field, 4 of 10 from 3. So a very solid showing from him. Look, this was a very good series. Honestly, Jaylen Brown has had a very, very solid showing this entire postseason. He hasn't had moments where he struggled shooting, particularly in this postseason to this point. And I think it's going to play a role in how he comes into this NBA Finals. And last but not least, we cannot talk about the Boston Celtics winning this series without talking about Drew Holiday. Drew Holiday was phenomenal in this series. Drew Holiday averaged 18.5 points per game, 7.3 boards, and 5.8 assists off 58% from the field, 58.7% from the field, and 41% from 3. In Game 1, he had 28 points off 10 of 16 from the field and shot 50% from 3. And in Game 3, had the game-clinching steal on Andrew Nembhard for them to seal the game and go up 3-0 in that series, take a commanding 3-0 series lead, in which obviously they eventually closed out. So those guys, to me, were the biggest pieces and were instrumental in closing out that series and sweeping their way into the NBA Finals. Taking a little bit of a closer look at Dallas's journey to the finals, one of the things that Dallas kind of struggled with this entire season was inconsistency. Not due to the inconsistency of the play of the players. I think they played as well as they could for the most part, but guys were in and out of the lineup. Kyrie missed a spell of games due to injury earlier on, and then, take a look at how the season ended up progressing, right? Because they were still within the playoff hunt most of the year, if not all the year, They were in the playoff hunt, but things really kind of took off after they made that trade for Daniel Gafford and P.J. Washington. Both those guys came in and had an impact immediately, specifically on the defensive end. Dallas ended up finishing in the last 20 games of the year with the best defensive rating in basketball. So they went from not only being a great offensive team, but a great defensive team throughout the course of that regular season. And then in addition to that, when we moved to the postseason, right, we take a look at their route to get here. They took out the fourth seeded Los Angeles Clippers in 6, and then they moved on to take out the number 1 seed in the Western Conference in 6 as well, in the Oklahoma City Thunder, and then moved on to beat the Minnesota Timberwolves, who had upset the defending champion Denver Nuggets in 7. So a very, very tough task, very, very gauntlet-like path to the NBA Finals, and now they are here competing against Boston. Look, full disclosure, I'm not going to run from it. I'm not going to hide from it. I picked Minnesota to win this series in 7. I thought that the factors of defense, I thought that they had the advantage in that factor. I thought the paint battle, they had the advantage there as well. On the glass, I like their role players a little bit better, but I did like Dallas's coaching more in this series. And like I said in the last video, one thing that I didn't account for that was almost brain dead that I didn't account for was the star players, was the star matchup, the most important matchup going into this series. So how did the series turn out? Why did Dallas end up winning that series? Well, number one, they were better defensively. In fact, in this series, they had a defensive rating of 112.1, which would have ranked top 10. In fact, it would have been tied with the Cleveland Cavaliers at 7 with that defensive rating of 112.1. And through these 5 games, they held Minnesota to an average of about 105.6 points per game, which also would have ranked top 10 in the regular season this season. So they were the better defensive team. They were the better team in the paint. I did not see that coming, right? Averaged 48 points per game in the paint, juxtaposed to Minnesota's 44.4 points in the paint, right? I thought the role players were better as well. Although Minnesota had a better bench this series, I felt like guys like Derek Lively, guys like PJ Washington, guys like Daniel Gafford fulfilled their roles very, very well and did a better job of contributing more so than Minnesota's role players. I thought the coaching was better. I thought that Jason Kidd did a good job of putting Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic in positions to succeed and continue to get their teammates involved in this series. And speaking of those two guys, Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving, the guys I foolishly left out in my prediction of this series coming in, those guys were phenomenal. Starting with Luka. Luka Doncic, look, he is the best player in this series, and I'm almost tempted to say, actually, I'm going to say it, he is the best player left in these playoffs. I think when it comes down to Luka, right? I mean, if you look at his numbers in the conference finals, averaging 32.4 points per game and 9.6 boards a game, along with 8.2 assists, shooting 47% from the field and 43.4% from 3. Looking at all those numbers, you kind of understand why he was the winner of the 2024 Magic Johnson Western Conference Finals MVP award, right? This was his best series by far. He had steadily been improving, as the playoffs had kind of waned, as they had continued, but I definitely think, this was his best series. I think this is the healthiest he looked. He was battling a knee injury, a knee issue throughout the course of this postseason. So Luka definitely starting to look more like himself. He hit the game winner in game 2. Remember that game-winning step-back 3 over Rudy Gobert. And he definitely looked like the best player in this series, and to me, the best player left in this NBA playoffs, or I guess NBA Finals. Now, the next guy we cannot not mention, sorry, the double negative there. We can't not mention is Kyrie Irving. Kyrie Irving was phenomenal in this postseason, has been phenomenal in this postseason so far, but was phenomenal in this conference finals, averaging 27 a game off 49% from the field, had 4.6 assists, and shot 37.5% from 3. Remember, he had that game 1 explosion, or in the first half, where he shot 11 for 14 from the field, set the tone to me, and not just that game, but honestly the entire series. Right, shooting 11 for 14 from the field, getting those 24 points. He was spectacular as well. And another guy I feel like I can't mention, because in the one game he did not play, they ended up losing, is Derek Lively. Derek Lively, who I think is going to be key in these NBA Finals, averaged 9.5 points per game, shot 100% from the field, did not miss a shot in the conference finals, almost 8 boards a game, a little under 2 blocks a game, and almost 3 assists per game as well. When you take a look at what Derek Lively provided, not only does he provide that rim protection, but he also does a good job providing a possible lob threat, in addition to making good decisions when Luka and Kyrie were blitzed. So I'm definitely impressed with how Lively is played, and he, I think, is one of the bigger reasons why Dallas was able to win in 5. So they took out Minnesota in the conference finals in 5 games, Very impressive result there. So now let's move on to the actual matchup, the finals matchup between these two teams. What we've been looking forward to since October, what we've been looking forward to since the beginning of the playoffs in April is finally here. The matchup between the best in the East and the best in the West. The number 5 seeded Dallas Mavericks will go to Boston in game 1 tomorrow, Thursday evening at 8:30 to take on the best team, the number 1 overall seeded Boston Celtics. So kind of looking at things from the Dallas side, these are their playoff averages for both these teams. Obviously, Dallas has played more games, with Boston having 2 5-game series and a sweep on their resume. Dallas through 17 games is averaging a set 107 points per game, is allowed 103, or rounded up to 108 and 104 there if you want. They're averaging 43.1 boards per game and averaging 47% from the field, right? Along with shooting 37% from 3. They're getting 23.6 bench points per game and averaging 44.5 paint points per game. Juxtapose that to Boston through 15 games. They were able to average 111.4 points per game, 101.3 points allowed per game. They averaged 43.7 rebounds per game. They shot an average of about 48% from the field, shot an average of about 36.7 or 36.8% from 3, so almost 37% from 3, averaging 18.7 bench points per game and 41.8 paint points per game. Thus far in the postseason, they played an injury-riddled Miami team who did not have Jimmy Butler. Let me not say injury-riddled, but they did not have their best player in Jimmy Butler. They played a Cavs team that was kind of injury-plagued, I suppose, throughout the course of this postseason. Right, they lost Jared Allen late in that series against Orlando, and so they didn't have Jared Allen the entirety of that series against Boston, in addition to the fact that Donovan Mitchell ended up leaving due to injury, I want to say the last 2 games of that series, and Karis LeVert did not play in Game 5 as well. So, you're taking a look at guys who, weren't exactly healthy. And then obviously the last team that they played in Indiana, who didn't have their all-star Tyrese Halliburton. Halliburton left Game 2, the third quarter of Game 2, due to a hamstring injury. I think he re-aggravated the same injury, the same hamstring that had kind of plagued him the entire season. So you take a look at it from that perspective, and then you juxtapose it to Dallas, who had to beat a 4th-seeded Clippers team. Now, granted, they did not have Kawhi Leonard, so definitely have to keep that in perspective, right? But then moved on to beat the number 1 seed in the Western Conference, right? Oklahoma City was the best team in the West the entire regular season, and they deserve a tremendous amount of respect regardless of their youth. Carrying that number 1 seed in the Western Conference is no small feat, and Dallas was able to beat them. And then in the conference finals, made almost quick work of the Minnesota Timberwolves, a team that upset the defending champion Denver Nuggets before they played Dallas in the conference finals. So, I take a look at the quality of opponent that Boston played, and I juxtapose that to who Dallas played. And look, you don't want to completely discredit Boston's resume, right? I mean, at the end of the day, they did still win 64 games. They still were the league's best team record-wise this entire season. But at the same time, when I take a look at how things have progressed this postseason, when I take a look at quality of opponent, how they've played, how have they been tested, right? I think Dallas has had a way harder road and a way more difficult test and task of getting to the finals than Boston has, and I think that's a fact that might be universally accepted. So definitely something I'm going to take into account when evaluating this series. Now, with all that out of the way, now we can finally take a look at what the keys are to victory for both teams in this series, or what to watch. What does each team need to do better than the other in order for them to take home that title of NBA champion? So let's start with, first of all, close late game execution, right? I think these are two teams that are very good at that. I definitely think Boston was tested with that a little bit more in this last conference finals series, and I also just very much trust Dallas in every single situation they've been in for close clutch games, if you will. So definitely late game execution is something we're going to need to take a closer look at and keep our eye on as this series progresses. If this series remains close, I think the paint battle is something we're going to need to also take a look at as well. Going to make sure we keep our eye on that as well. The 3-point shooting will be very important, right? We're going to have to take a look at that and make sure we keep our eye on who shoots the ball better from three. I definitely think defense, these are two really good defensive teams. Remember, Dallas was the best defensive team, had the highest defensive rating of any team the last 20 games of the regular season. So definitely something we're going to keep our eye on. Another thing that's going to come into effect during the course of this series is definitely the coaching battle, right? At the end of the day, like I said, these are two coaches. I've definitely significantly underestimated how well Joe Mazzulla would handle this coaching challenge to coach this team to the NBA Finals this entire postseason. Give him his credit. He's done a great job. And then you also have to take a look at Jason Kidd. Jason Kidd, to me, has done a very, very good job mastering his rotations, making good adjustments, putting his players in positions to succeed, and maximizing them on both sides of the ball. So when you take a look at it from that perspective, we also need to factor in role players as well, who oftentimes are representations of the coaches on the floor as well. So when you take a look at it from that perspective as well, so you have the factors of close and late game execution, paint battle, 3-point shooting, defense, coaching battle as well, and then role players. And the most important thing, and I'm not going to overlook it this time, is the star players, the star power, and how they play, how they rise to the occasion in terms of making the most of this opportunity and making a name for themselves on the biggest stage, which is the NBA Finals. So now, with those key factors highlighted, where does Dallas have the advantage? I'm going to start with them because they're the lower seed. Where does Dallas have the advantage? Well, first and foremost, I think they have the better closers and late game execution players when it comes down to it. Look, Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving are amongst the most clutch players in the NBA. Luka Doncic is a stone cold killer, a stone cold assassin. He's very good in those late game situations, and we saw that on full display in game 2 in that Minnesota series in the conference finals for them. And then you take a look at Kyrie Irving, who hit one of the greatest shots in NBA history in the NBA Finals in Game 7 of the 2016 Finals, and the step back three over Steph Curry to seal the deal, or kind of seal the deal for Cleveland in that 2016 series. So historically, I trust Dallas's closers more than I trust Boston's closers. Not to say that Boston's players cannot close. I'm just thinking that Dallas has the edge and the advantage there. I think they have a better paint presence. At the end of the day, they do average more points against, to me, better competition in the Western Conference. Like I said, I'm going to continue to allude to that as I did earlier. And on top of that, too, the consistent ability to have lob threats like a Daniel Gafford, like a Derek Lively, in addition to guys who can get to the rim themselves, like a PJ Washington, like a Derek Jones Jr., right? Kyrie Irving can get to the rim himself if he wants to as well. So I think they have a much better paint presence. I think their 3-point shooting will be a little bit more consistent in this series. I think they're going to do a better job shooting it in this series, and I trust their stars and their mentality a little bit more in this series as well, right? The star players, which star players are more reliable, right? I trust Luka's mentality of being a stone cold killer. When anyone tries to mess with him or heckle him or Kyrie on the court, he seems to take that very, very personally. So I trust that in him, and I trust Kyrie's experience, right? He's done this before. He's been to the finals 4 times already, and this will be his 5th. So, I definitely think, or excuse me, this will be his 4th, if I'm not mistaken, right? So 2014, 2015, 2016, 2015, 2016, 2016, 2017. Yep, so this will be his 4th NBA Finals appearance. So he's been here, and he's even won. Obviously, we know the one he won in 2016, upsetting the 73-9 Golden State Warriors. So I trust their star players more, and I trust Jason Kidd, right? And I give Jason Kidd the edge over Joe Mazzulla of Boston, due to the fact that, like I said, I really value and take into effect the level of competition Dallas had to take out to get to this point. And like I said, it's not a slight to Mazzulla, but it's very much something that I think works in Kidd's favor when you're able to beat teams that are more talented oftentimes than maybe you are, but you have the better players and the best players in this series. And to me, they have one of the two top five players in this series, and if not the best player in the series in Luka Doncic, and obviously top five guy in Kyrie in this series as well. So definitely think Dallas has those advantages working for them in this series, right? Like I said, the paint battle, they averaged more points in the paint than Boston did. They averaged a higher percentage from three than Boston did. So I definitely think these are things that matter, especially when you factor in the quality of opponent they played to get to this point as well. And then you take a look at it from Boston's perspective, right? Boston's advantages that I think that they can exploit, they are the deeper team for sure with more reliable role players. I think I give their role players the edge, even though I think Dallas's have played better and I think they've been better. I give Boston's role players the edge due to the fact that there's a lot of guys who have been in the NBA Finals before, a lot of guys who have made deep playoff runs on this team before. To take a look at it from Dallas' perspective, PJ Washington, even though I have a lot of faith in how well he can play in this series, he has not been to the finals. I mean, he hasn't even been to the playoffs to this degree. This is his first time, his first postseason run, right? So I take into account when I look at it from that perspective. I like a guy like Drew Holiday making more of an impact. I like a guy like Derek White, who's also been in the finals, making more of an impact. I like a guy like an Al Horford to a degree, making more of an impact because of how much more experience he has in the playoffs and in the finals. So definitely something I'm going to take a look at going forward. I think they have more reliable defensive players, right? I think when you take a look at Boston, they have guys that they can switch almost 1 through 4, I would say. 1 through 4, maybe 1 through 5, depending on the health of Porzingis, right? And those guys are Derek White, Drew Holiday, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, and, like I said, depending on the health of Kristaps Porzingis, maybe Porzingis as well. A lot of guys who can switch, and then Al Horford himself, I mean, it's going to be difficult to keep Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic in front of Al Horford from a defensive perspective, but I don't think he's somebody you can sleep on defensively. He still will compete defensively as well. So I like the depth of Boston's defense more than I like the depth of Dallas's. And then last but not least, they have way more players with finals experience, like I alluded to before. Derek White, Drew Holiday, who's won a championship before. People are seeming to forgetting that as well. Drew Holiday is an NBA champion. Jason Tatum, who has finals experience, and although it wasn't great, you have Jaylen Brown as well, Al Horford, all these guys who I think have a little bit more experience. Guys like Peyton Pritchard off the bench, they have more finals experience than Dallas does. So I'm definitely going to keep an eye on that, and that definitely can play a role in determining this series, right? That a prediction, though I wanted to kind of take a closer look at guys in this series that I think we also need to keep our eye on as well, starting with Jason Tatum. This is a big series for Jason Tatum. The last NBA Finals he played kind of left a bad taste personally in my mouth in terms of how I view him as a player. I don't think he played particularly well, and I also, have to take a look at how last year's playoffs ended in terms of going down 3-0 to Miami, the 8th-seeded Miami Heat, and being the leader of that team. And so I definitely hold him responsible for that level of play the last 2 seasons that I've kind of been disappointed in, especially with how Boston has ended their seasons disappointingly these last 2 years. So definitely keeping an eye on him so far this postseason and throughout the course of the playoffs. Averaging 26, 44% from the field, 10 boards, 6 assists, right? Had 36 points, 10 boards, and 8 assists in that game 3, as I mentioned before. So big game from him, but I need to see these averages a little bit better in this series. I point to that game 3 specifically because to this point in the playoffs, his average from 3 is 29%, and he shot 5 of 10 from 3 in Indiana. So I want to keep an eye on whether or not the 3-point shot for him improves even more going into the finals. So Jason Tatum, definitely a guy I have my eye on in this series. Another guy is Jaylen Brown, the Eastern Conference Finals MVP, the Larry Bird MVP winner. Right, I think he's had a phenomenal postseason at this point. I think at times, when you take a look at Jaylen Brown, his mentality and his consistency of play at times makes him seem like a better option than Jason Tatum at times. I think he is very much not better than Jason Tatum, but I do think at times when you take a look at how Tatum falls short in moments, and Brown at times rises to those moments. I definitely feel like you wouldn't be wrong in saying in certain moments that he looks better than Jason Tatum. Brown so far this postseason averaging 25 points per game in this postseason, 36.8% from three, 54% from the field, and averaging 6.1 boards per game, right? And in the last series he played against Indiana in the conference finals, he averaged 29 off 51.7% from the field, 5 boards, and 37% from three. Remember, he had that 40-point explosion in game two. So, there was a reason he took home that Eastern Conference Finals MVP trophy, and I think he showed that in the last series, and I think he showed that consistency all postseason long, shooting well from three, shooting well from the field. I definitely value Jaylen Brown, and I'm keeping my eye on him in this NBA Finals. Another guy I want us to kind of keep our eye on is Drew Holiday, right? Drew Holiday, throughout the course of the conference finals, he averaged 18.5 points per game, shot 58.7% from the field, almost 60% from the field, and almost 42% from three, right? So Drew Holiday definitely had a very good conference finals, and we're going to see whether or not he can carry that over into the NBA Finals. Remember, great defender in addition to the offensive numbers that we saw. Remember that game-winning steal in Game 3, or game-clinching steal in Game 3 is definitely something we want to keep our eye on. Another guy is Derek White. I referenced him earlier. Huge part of what they do, a consistent 3-and-D presence, right? Averaging 18 points per game, just under 18 points per game, 47.1% from the field, 4.6 rebounds per game, 1.3 blocks a game as well. So this is a guy, somebody who's giving it to them on the defensive end of the floor and the offensive end of the floor. These are consistent playoff averages, so not specific to a series, but I'm definitely keeping my eye on what Derek White can do. Between these two guys, Drew Holiday and Derek White, I'm very curious to see who Joe Mazzulla is going to trust with the privilege, the responsibility of guarding Kyrie Irving in this series. I think he'll probably lean towards Drew Holiday, probably throw multiple bodies at him. Drew Holiday, Derek White will probably have a decent amount of opportunities to guard Kyrie Irving, but I'm genuinely curious to see how he handles that. And then last but not least, the X factor in this series, Kristaps Porzingis. I call him an X factor because I don't know what we're going to get from him. I mean, this entire postseason, he hasn't really played. He played 4 games in that Miami series, that opening series, and he averaged 12.3 points off 38% from the field. He did shoot 40% from three, had 5 boards, and averaged 1.5 blocks per game. So, I'm interested in seeing what he can do, because at the end of the day, in that win against Dallas, it's only a 1-game sample size we saw in the regular season. Porzingis had 24.6 boards and a block off 57% shooting from the field and 50% shooting from three. So definitely keeping my eye on him. And then from the Dallas perspective, obviously Luka Doncic. I said it before, I'm going to say it again. The best player to me in this series, the winner of the Western Conference Finals MVP trophy, the Magic Johnson Western Conference Finals MVP trophy. So definitely looking for Luka to perform. He's the best player in the series. He's played better after every series, similar kind of to Tatum as well. So I'm looking to see how much of an impact he has in this series. He's averaged 28.8 points per game to this point in the playoffs. Not a great field goal percentage, almost Tatum-like to a degree, shooting 43.8% from the field, 34.3% from three, averaging 9 boards and 8.8 assists, almost 9 assists as well. So definitely curious to see how Luka responds. I trust his mindset. If there's any player, and I can't really explain it, I think it's really because of his mindset that I trust the most to show up and perform in this series, it's Luka. And I really do, for whatever reason, trust him more so than Kyrie Irving. Kyrie, he has the finals experience, and I think he's going to play well, but I also can't overlook the fact that in the past couple of seasons, he's been 0-10 against Boston when he goes to Boston, right? He hasn't been able to have very much success against Boston. I think there's a mental edge that I've seen. I think in Boston, he doesn't shoot the ball particularly as well as he does against other teams, specifically when he goes to Boston. And maybe that has a lot to do with Boston's defense, but at the same time, I'm keeping my eye on Kyrie. I trust him because at the end of the day, he has the finals experience in terms of being a champion, more so than almost any other player on the court, not named Drew Holiday. But at the same time, when I look at how Kyrie has played against Boston, I don't have a whole lot of confidence, but I trust the fact that Kyrie himself has played well on this stage many times before, so I will give him the benefit of the doubt in that area. But the most important thing that I think I'm going to trust Kyrie in this series is his level to defend, right? I think he has defended very, very well throughout the course of this postseason. He's been holding opponents to 43.4% field goal shooting as the primary defender. So definitely something I'm going to keep my eye on for him. But, he's also been a very good offensive player throughout the course of this postseason as well. And I'm not going to underscore that and, keep that into, or not going to take it into account when I'm factoring in how he'll play in this series, right? He's averaging 22.8 points per game, shooting 48.5% from the field, 42% from three, and averaging 5.2 assists throughout the entirety of this postseason. So he's giving you offense and he's giving you defense, and I have no reason to believe that won't continue going forward in this postseason as well. Another guy I really feel like we need to keep our eye on is Derek Lively. Derek Lively has been very good, especially for a rookie in this postseason. The reason why I don't trust Dallas's role players as much is because of their youth. Derek Lively is a rookie, and I do think at times there might be some rookie mistakes, but at the same time, I do believe he will play very, very well for them. He's averaging 8.6 points per game, shooting 67% from the field, 7.2 boards a game, 1.2 blocks a game, and he's a consistent lob threat that can really do a good job of helping Luka and Kyrie get out of pickles when they need to just throw the ball up towards the rim. And on top of that, he's a great defender, right? He's holding opponents to 43.5% from the field, and then 42.2% when he's guarding guards specifically. So definitely a big that's also switchable as well. Finally, I want to take a look at the acquisitions Dallas made during the trade deadline that I think are going to be huge in this series, and that starts with P.J. Washington. P.J. Washington in the previous series against Minnesota held Karl Anthony Towns to 34.9% shooting from the field as the primary defender, and he shot 46.9% in the Oklahoma City series. So he's a definition of 3 and D. Now, obviously, I took those numbers from two different series, so can he put it together in this Boston series, right? He's shooting 43.2% over the course of the entire playoffs, and he's shooting 36.3% from three, so an average three-point shooter, and he's averaging 13.6 points per game with 6.7 boards per game. So can he provide that defense? Can he provide that timely shooting that he's provided in the previous series in this series in the NBA Finals? And then lastly, Daniel Gafford. Gafford, man, I tell you what a huge acquisition he became for Dallas, because he immediately made an impact on their ability to have a presence in the paint, right? Whether that's rebounding, whether that's blocking shots, whether that's scoring in the paint off lobs, right? He's another lob threat that's a great defensive presence in addition to what Derek Lively provides, because he's obviously the starter, or Daniel Gafford, is obviously the starter. He's holding opponents to 43.8% from the field when he's the primary defender. So, in addition to the 9.2 points per game he averages off almost 62% shooting from the field, he almost averages 2 blocks as well, right? And 6 boards. So I definitely think Gafford will have a role in this series as well. He's definitely a role player that I'm looking forward to seeing. But like I said, he doesn't have a whole lot of experience in this moment juxtaposed to Boston. So it'll be interesting to see how it all shakes out. But at the end of the day, seeing as though Dallas has more advantages in areas that I value more when it comes to evaluating teams and predicting winners, specifically at this point in the season, with this being the NBA Finals, I give them the slight edge. I do think this series could really go either way. These two teams are evenly matched. I spent the better part of this last week kind of seeing if either team had a heavier advantage than the other, to kind of see if this could be possibly a quick series, but I just don't see it being one. I think this is going to be a 7-game series, and I think Dallas takes it in 7. I think it kind of goes, this prediction by game. I think Boston will take game 1. Dallas takes games 2 and 3. I think Boston takes game 4 and 5. And I think Dallas takes 2 more against Boston, going back to Boston for game 7. So that's kind of how I think it's going to shake out, specifically based on everything we've discussed here. But let me know what you think, right? I mean, this is This is a great final series I think we have ahead of us, and I'm definitely curious and would love to have some dialogue in the comment section below. But that'll do it for this edition of Inside the Lines. Like I said, I'm super excited for this series. I'm super excited for the NBA Finals and would love to hear what you think. Like I said, leave a comment in the comment section below. Like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. But until next time, we hope you keep it inside the lines.